Let him go, or her, or it, whatever or whoever you are most attached to, most in love with, most in need of. Let that go. Or else what? Or else you cannot be his disciple. For the disciple of Jesus Christ, it is only by renouncing our possessions that we can receive back something even better. And we see an example of this in Paul's letter to Philemon, our second reading. Paul is clever, well-educated, and a talented writer. He knows how to be subtle. And we see that on full display in this letter. But because we live in a different time and culture, because we don't have the whole letter right now, we might miss what Paul is saying. So allow me to spell it out plainly. He is asking Philemon to release Onesimus from slavery. Onesimus is a slave according to Roman law. Slavery in Rome was different from the slavery of the early United States. It was often less violent and more flexible than what we think of. Onesimus had it much better than the slaves of the 1800s. And yet, he still belonged to another human being, according to the law. His master was Philemon. Now, Paul is not interested in political revolution. He knows that Christians living the gospel will change society. It will affect politics. But political change is not the goal. So Paul never develops platforms or strategies or advocates for certain policies. He's always focused on the conversion of individual Christians and the Christian community rather than the government. This is why Paul never says something like, all masters should free their slaves. And he never says, we should rise up to set the slaves free. St. Paul does think slavery is wrong. He knows that. But he's more interested in changing hearts than in changing the law. This is why in his other letters, Paul tells Christian slaves to work well and respect their masters. He tells Christian masters to treat their slaves with kindness and charity. His goal there is to set slaves and masters to treat each other as brothers in Christ, even if their technical legal status does not change. Just as St. Paul sees himself as a servant of Jesus Christ above all else, and he only uses his legal status as a Roman citizen when it's helpful. Even still, this letter is different because it shows us Paul's real hope. In this letter, he does ask Philemon, the master, to set Onesimus, the slave, free. A situation has arisen where changing the legal status is helpful. Why? For two reasons that work together beautifully. For one, St. Paul needs Onesimus to help him. Paul purposely reminds us that he's an old man to emphasize his need. Onesimus does help him, but he's also a runaway slave. And his master is in a different city. It would cause all kinds of legal trouble if people around Paul accused him of stealing a slave. And Paul was the one who evangelized and baptized Philemon, the master. So Philemon probably would have agreed to let his slave stay with Paul, but it would have been messy and difficult to prove that with the distances involved. So he wants him free to clear all that up. The second reason is for Philemon's own benefit. Paul saw an opportunity to invite Philemon into a deeper conversion. St. Paul had this habit of convincing Christians to give up their stuff. He constantly talks about caring for the poor, detaching from worldly possessions, learning to cheerfully give to God. And he knows that a reluctant gift is not as good as a willing one, which is why he says in the letter, I did not want to do anything without your consent. So the good you do might not be forced, but voluntary. Paul never outright says, set him free from slavery. And Philemon probably could have just sent Onesimus back with a letter that says, I've loaned my slave. But Paul says things like, welcome Onesimus as you would me, and offers to have him come back forever, no longer as a slave, but more than a slave, a brother. It's a pretty strong hint of what Paul really wants Philemon to do. And it's good for Philemon to practice forgiveness, to reconcile with Onesimus, who did run away from him. So by giving Philemon this chance to see his runaway slave in person, to forgive him for running away, and then to set him free, Paul is helping Philemon have this opportunity to practice love and mercy and generosity, instead of sort of begrudgingly just giving in to what already happened. And Paul means what he says about Philemon losing Onesimus in order to get him back as better. Having a brother in Christ really is better than having a slave. And this is a perfect illustration of what Jesus is getting at in the gospel. Jesus' command to hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, and even our own lives is a pretty tough command. So is the ultimatum. Anyone who does not renounce all his possessions cannot be my disciple. But Jesus means it. Being his disciple costs us everything. It also gains everything. Now, I should clarify. Jesus is not telling us to feel hatred towards our loved ones. He never tells us how to feel. He tells us how to act. And in Hebrew culture, they sometimes use the word hate as a comparison to highlight what's more important. If they want to say you should love your wife more than your neighbor, they'll often say you should hate your neighbor and love your wife, to make the point of what comes first. So Jesus is saying you have to put him above everything else and everyone else, including your own spouse and children. And that's still difficult. Sometimes that literally means choosing one over the other. Sometimes our friends and family really think we hate them because we refuse to sin with them, or because we choose an obligation to Jesus over something they want from us. And that's where this comparison to Philemon and Onesimus comes in. It's not easy for Philemon to release a slave. It's kind of like losing a valuable possession and a good friend at the same time. But if done for Christ, whatever we give up is given back to us. Only instead of being a possession, it becomes a gift. Better a brother in Christ than a slave. You can possess a slave, but a brother in Christ is a gift. We might not own our spouse or blood relatives in the same way, but they do belong to us in a certain natural sense. There's an obligation and expectation that's kind of like possessing. And when we're willing to sacrifice that claim on our loved ones, when we're willing to put our love of Jesus Christ over and above that, there's an opportunity for grace to give them back to us in a more powerful way. Instead of temporary, natural, and legal bonds, we have the potential to gain eternal communion with them. Houses and cars might last for decades. Family and marriage are for life. But the gifts of grace and divine union are eternal. But that original surrender has to be real. We need to know the cost up front. That tower can be built. That battle can be won if we are willing to look ahead and accept the cost. So stop holding on to the stuff that makes you feel safe. Stop holding on to the grudges and resentments towards those who hurt you, your way of holding on to them and controlling. Stop holding on to your desire to possess other people and keep them for yourself. Let him go, or her, or it, whatever or whoever you are most attached to, most in love with, most in need of, let it go. Because whatever we possess possesses us in return. But if we set it free, we are set free. Free to receive back something better, not a possession or a slave, but a gift. The gift of Jesus Christ. And whoever has Jesus Christ has everything else besides.